Thank you so much for coming out tonight. Thank you, Jeff, for inviting me to be a part of such a great lineup. It's been really wonderful. I think musicians are really cool. And actually this story would work really well with a heartbeat reverberating behind it.
You want me to?
No, I'm just saying, hold that thought. And actually the oxygen mask would work well too, so you'll see. So I'm going to read a piece of surrealist flash fiction that was recently published in Tin House Online. Cardia. How she ended up like this, free of her double-walled sack and lurking in the bushes beneath his bedroom window, is still unclear. One day she was a healthy mixture of humor and pathos contracting at 72 beats per minute. The next she was discarded in an alley, broken and struggling to stimulate herself on her own. She tucks herself under crumpled newspaper and cardboard, hoping to shield the late-night chill. But a sudden wind forces the steaming air under her makeshift cover, and she shivers. Out of pure instinct, she pumps harder, hoping to warm herself, but her blood runs like a phantom limb now, moving through her system, invisible, yet still riddled with pain. If it weren't for her own intrinsic rhythm, that uncontrollable jumble of self-excitable cells, she would have stopped long ago. After nearly 6 months of living in exile, her impulses have become dangerous and unpredictable. She hasn't seen him in weeks, but she knows he's there. She can still sense him, still believing this nocturnal ache to be the pull of fate. She nestles deeper into the damp dirt, into the cavity her presence has carved out from these nightly visits. She doesn't try to understand why she tortures herself like this. She's never had the capacity for reason. She only knows she can't live without this nearness, this ritual, as if it will calm the unexpected flutters that disrupt her fragile rhythm. She wants to tell him that she's sorry, that she would take it back if she could, that to linger beneath his window night after night is an awful, plaguing thing. The stabbing twinges proof she was never fully divided about him or about them. When she was younger, she longed to beat in the chest of a hummingbird, imagining how the adrenaline from 600 beats per minute would catapult her to giddy heights, that the singular desire to consume nectar would burn deep in her core, how the threat of continuously being hours away from starving to death would intensify her will to live. There wouldn't be time to beat in futility. You would just know. Reject the flowers that don't give you what you need, that sweet liquid almost stronger than you can bear, because every drop is another second of your drastically short life. She pulls the newspaper in tighter around her and is surprised to see drops of blood on the black and white print. At first, the blood excites her, a hopeful sign that her old life can soon resume. But she knows it's just the darkness pooling inside of her. She is haunted by the effort it will take to revive that life. If she lives to be 65 years old, she will have pulsated and throbbed and pounded her way through 2.5 billion contractions. It's more than she can fathom in the bitter night, and she burrows deeper, exhausted. Somewhere a dog begins to bark, at a squirrel or a cat, or perhaps at nothing. It barks and it howls until the rustling is heard above her, someone stirring at the window, finally. She moves from her shelter and sees a silhouette, hands cupping eyes as they peer through the glass. She knows it's him. But as he stares at the moon or that incessant sound of loneliness, his face is hidden. She needs to see him, the fervent eyes, and that crippling lure, his supple mouth. Moving a bit farther from her nest, his face catches the light from his bedroom, illuminating his features. Even through the warped reflection of the window pane, she can see once more that he is everything. She palpitates an urgent tempo, wanting to drum him all the way into her recesses or to flush him completely out, until a woman appears, a stranger behind him, arms wrapped around his torso, pulling him back into their nest. She panics at this breach, and her impulses fling her out into the open, into his line of vision. A shrieking far more anguished than any dog erupts from inside the house. Startled and confused, they gape at each other, pointing and pumping and shaking as if they've each flushed out a sniper, and then she sees it, her reflection, shimmering in the glass like a gory ghost, spawned out of arteries and veins and a bloody aorta, the cracked layers of withering tissue covered with sputum and urine and bits of garbage. She is nothing but a sickening gray slab of muscle and desperation. The curtains are thrown shut, and the image of him and her own subterfuge vanishes. She falters on the lawn, and for a brief moment she remembers. The other arms, the other nest, so secret and so brutal. She envisions sinking into the earth, the early morning dew and blades of grass too heavy for her to hold. It would be so easy to collapse into, excuse me, fighting a sore throat. It would be so easy to collapse into the dirt with her mistakes and just let go. But the sirens and the stomping feet soon jar her from her stoppage, and she bolts. Where she'll go for now, she doesn't know. Her impulses are getting harder and harder to control, but at least they mean she's still hoping that her rhythm will settle, that she'll be able to return to an integrated life somewhere, someday. Perhaps a fish, she imagines, as she roams the waking streets. A primitive fish like a codfish. The blood flow is so simple, flowing in an easy S shape at a painless 20 beats per minute, using more of the aorta and less of the heart. So effortless and so uncomplicated.
Her debut story collection, The Un-Americans, which, again, everyone's required to take one of his own. You have to buy one. I love this book. It's amazing. It's just incredible. How many people have it? But how many people read it? No, so no one's raising hands. That means you're definitely getting one tonight. It was recently published by W.W. Norton. She is a National Book Foundation 5 under 35 honoree and received her MFA from Columbia University. Her writings appeared or was forthcoming on NPR's This American Life and in One Story, Ecotone, Glimmer Train, American Train, Mississippi Review, Prize Stories, and elsewhere. She lives in SF and is working on her novel, The After Party, which will also be published by Norton. Please welcome Molly.
Thanks so much. Thanks for having me, and thanks to all of you for coming out. This has been such a nice night. It's been amazing hearing the music and just hearing so much great writing, so thank you to everyone. Yeah, so my book was just published in February, and I will read the opening of the story, so you can read it. I'll just read from the beginning, and I'll just read a short excerpt. So it's called The Difficult Phase. Talia was in line at Cafe Noach when she noticed a man watching her. He was at the group table by the window, handsome in a nerdy, chaotic way, wearing a rumpled orange t-shirt and metallic glasses a shade lighter than his hair. He smiled. She smiled back. He smiled again, and Talia, interested more in the light buzz of flirtation than an actual conversation, gave him one last look, then tossed her change into the tip jar. Out on Ahad Ha'am Street, people were clustered around little tables lining the sidewalk, sipping coffee and smoking leisurely, though it was noon on a Wednesday. The sun was out after an entire April of rain, and as Talia rounded the corner, she wondered if she was the only person in all of Tel Aviv rushing back to eat at her desk, the only person who would have left the cafe so quickly when one day she knew these situations could magically stop presenting themselves. So she turned back and saw the man in the orange t-shirt barreling toward her. Did I forget something, she asked him. What, he said. In the cafe, she said. No, he said. You look familiar. Hebrew University? And when she shook her head, he said, maybe from the neighborhood? Before Talia could think of an answer, before she could tilt her head and say possibly in an alluring and non-committal way, rather than the truth, which was that, at 29, her career was shot, she'd moved back home with her parents a half hour south of the city, and the only reason she was even in the neighborhood was because she'd picked up fact-checking work nearby at the local paper they left out for free on trains and in laundromats. Mr. Orange T-shirt blinked a couple times, then said, oh, fuck it, you were flirting with me in there, right? She had been flirting, and the realization made her feel better. At least it was interesting. Better than going back to her office, where a deadline and a morning's worth of unopened emails loomed. The man looked about 40, with large blue eyes and pale, stubbled skin. Though they were standing still, he was out of breath, and his sense of personal space was off by an inch or two. She did a quick ring check and pegged him as recently divorced, the type who patrolled cafes for romance during his lunch hour. It's hard to tell, he continued. Maybe you were just being nice. No, Talia conceded. I was flirting. She'd said a lot of bold things in her life, but never something so direct to a person she didn't know, and it threw her so off balance that when he started to walk, Talia fell into step with him. She was aware they were heading away from the paper, but she could feel the day opening up, wider and wider. She liked that neither of them seemed to have a particular destination, that they were just ambling around, something she only did on vacation. They turned down a narrow street, and she watched two girls, quick and earnest, chase each other through a courtyard while an older man, several stories above, watered his plants. Everything felt squintingly bright and a little too in focus, as if she just stumbled into the daylight after a heavy night of drinking. The cloudless sky, the sparkly asphalt road, the squares of silver foil covering a woman's hair in a salon window. At the corner, Talia and the man made a right, then crossed a boulevard and walked up another road until they were standing in front of a junior high school. I have to go, he said, and Talia realized that on her supposedly aimless, carefree walk, she'd actually followed this man back to work. You're a teacher, she said. She felt so exposed. What had she expected? To run off to some hotel room together? That an hour with a stranger, something she only right then realized she'd even been contemplating, was going to fix everything? I have a meeting with the principal, he said. My daughter's been cutting class. I was terrible, Talia said, to say something. I cheated on all my tests. I'm late, he said, but can I call you? Talia hesitated, but she liked his messy hair and light eyes and the open and slightly injured way he stared at her, so she gave him her work number. Thanks, he said, buoyant with approval. He waved and sprinted across the street. At the sidewalk, he turned around. I'm Tomer, he yelled. Talia, she called back. Ah, he yelled. Dahlia. What a beautiful name. And then dashed up the steps of the school, disappearing into the crowd of teenagers being beckoned inside. And I'll stop there.
So last but certainly not least, we are graced with the, we have Evan Carr in the house tonight. It's amazing. And if you haven't got one of these, he made this really beautiful, like, single, this limited edition, beautiful Bernal yoga that I think he's going to read from, I think.